everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I am Luciana DiTullio. I am here with my friends Jana Jaraysi and Nathan Marney from Eastern Washington University. And today we're going to talk about 3 ways to create community through digital communication. So I am going to share my screen with you and start with some introductions. So as I said, I have my friends here with me. Again, Luciana DiTullio. I am an account executive with Mongoose, and here with Jana and Nate. Jana and Nate, would you guys like to take a minute and introduce yourself to everyone?
Sure, I'll go first. Hi, everybody. Jana Jaraysi, Director of Admissions at Eastern Washington University. I've been with Eastern now within admissions for 15 years and in various roles from a recruiter to events and visits and now overseeing the team. And so it's always exciting to talk about new ways that we communicate with students and all the fun things learned over the years.
Thanks, Jana. My name is Nathan Marney. I'm the Enrollment Marketing Coordinator or Manager at Eastern Washington University. And Jana, I was so disappointed you didn't mention that you're an award-winning admissions professional, like we talked about.
Yeah, Jana won an award at Super Conference, which this is a continuation of that conversation there. And Jana did, being very humble, win an award, the Pacific Northwestern Association of College Admissions Counseling Excellent in Admissions Award. That is a mouthful, but Jana is an award winner. So we need to brag on her a little bit about that.
Definitely. Every opportunity. So a little bit about me. I'm an alumni of Eastern Washington University, graduated, got my master's in social work, and during that time fell in love working on a college campus as a hall director. Worked in student affairs for a few years before making my way over to the enrollment side of things. And I've been doing this work ever since and really love it. And obviously I work with some amazing people, so that always helps.
Yeah, thanks, Nate. And as I said, we were continuing this conversation, but I do want to point out, not only is Jana award-winning, but both Jana and Nate are both doctoral students who are soon-to-be candidates. And just curious if you want to tell a little bit about your research areas or somehow that's going and your experience there.
Yeah, I mean, fingers crossed, soon-to-be candidates. This summer we'll be ABD, so done with our coursework and go from there. I think I'm the one lagging the furthest behind in our cohorts, so I need to get my things together. But for potential research areas, I'm really interested right now. I've been doing a lot of reading around AI and potential student outcomes related to how AI might be used in the college setting. So that's one area that I'm looking at doing.
That's awesome. It's so needed, right? Like so timely in what we're experiencing right now.
Yeah. The fun of topics is the evolution that we go through of ideas and our interests. I feel like Nate has had like 7 different ones. I think my original list had like 10. But outside of just admissions work, I've been on board committees for PNACAC and PACRO and other associations related to admissions. So really value the work that conferences bring in regards to professional development. And so really interested in that area on how professional development benefits and impacts higher education staff, and how is that carried forward to other places as well within higher education and can benefit us. So I'm starting some reading and some literature review, and so it's so interesting to see what's out there and then what I can find out hopefully in the next 12 to 14 months. So excited for that. And just being at Super ECEC, what was like last month, almost a month ago, and running into everybody, connecting, networking, seeing the Mongoose team there and other partners as well is always fun. It's like a little bit like summer camp. You talk and meet with everybody virtually now, but when you see them in person, it's another level of excitement and like, okay, let's talk about what's going on, what's working, what's not working. And then seeing everybody together is one of the highlights of meeting at for conferences.
It is so good to see everyone outside of the box. I always say I'm shorter than I appear in person, I'm shorter than I appear in a Zoom, because that's usually what I think. I just talk really loud and like with my hands, so I talk big, and then they see me, they're like, "Oh, you're miniature size," which is is always fun. But one theme that we saw at Super Conference and kind of how this idea came is the idea around personalization, digital storytelling, communication plans. That was a theme that we saw weaved throughout. So that's really what we're going to talk about today. We came up with 3 overarching themes, and those are say something, be consistent, and connect. So that's what we're going to review today. But I did want to just give a sense of who we are as Mongoose. We've partnered with Eastern Washington University for quite some time, but we work with institutions across the country, over 950 institutions. We work with a lot of teams. So Mongoose is a student engagement platform that offers both text and chat in one platform. And we work with teams that are in student recruiting, so communicating with students at 16 years old, all the way through that life cycle. So you're thinking admissions and enrollment, or financial aid, student success, advancement and alumni. So really all across that entire student life cycle. But these are where we are and some of our partners we have. So I just kind of wanted to throw that out there to give an idea of who we are. But we're going to start here by really just having a conversation. So I am going to stop sharing my screen and bring it back here with Jana and Nate. And the first, we talked about saying something. So not just sending communication to send communication, but really being intentional in that. Can you guys talk a little bit more about how you've seen that work and what things you have seen work well and why?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think one of the important things that we talk about and try to be very strategic about is having a call to action. When we text students through Mongoose, it's not just like, hey, how's it going? There's some poignant questions or reminders or making sure that students are in the loop, because we also don't want them to ignore our text messages or our emails that we send them. And so we try to be funny yet serious at the same time to make sure that we're reaching out because we're trying to help you through your journey to becoming a college student. And so can we do that and use that modality to do so they can connect? And our recruiters are the primary ones who connect with their students. And so they are able to also build that relationship with them through texting and emails as well. And that leads to really great conversations and excitement on both ends, right? For the student and for our staff who are excited to help them.
And I think, Jana, what you mentioned as far as building relationships, I think that's really the point, right? If you just do a check-in, you're not really bringing any value to the conversation or helping the student in any way, really. You're just kind of like, right now it's big anti-melt season, so wanting to do a check-in is pretty normal, I think, and wanting to make sure they're still liking your university or want to still connect, but having some intentionality behind it so that it furthers the relationship or it creates an engagement opportunity. That's what we try to do. That's our main focus, is we want to create those opportunities for engagement, to continue the conversation, to continue building those relationships.
Well, and I think it's natural as educators, people who work in education, to be empathetic, to want to help a student, to be supportive, right? And you think about students when you're working admissions, so prospective students and current students, and we're all aware right now and want to be supportive of mental health and that they feel like they belong. And so you think, whoa, I'm going to check in. Like, I want to make sure you're okay, right? But if we do too many of those just to check in, a student might say, I don't need one more thing. I'm going to opt out. Like, I don't want you just to check in. And then you lose the opportunity to engage with them when it is important information that needs to get in their hands, right? And you don't want to fill up their inbox of any kind, whether that's text, email, whatever modality you're using of communication, just to do a check-in. So, and when we talk about those intentionalities and making sure it's a check-in, but with a call to action or with some reason behind it, not just for the sake of, I truly want to make sure you're okay, but I also don't want to fill up that box.
Yeah. And it's a balance, and it's a powerful tool. I was just thinking how we've had students that our recruiters may have started working with when they were juniors, and then they come to Eastern and then they have a question. And even though they have an academic advisor or they have a faculty advisor, they still reach out to that one person that talked to them frequently throughout that 2-year span. And so we've had recruiters who are on the team for some time have students text them again, just kind of out of the blue, and be like, hey, where can I go for this? Or, just simple questions, because they have built that comfort level with staff. And so I think that's powerful as a tool and as a way to, even though we're working on the next or the future class coming in, we still have current students that have built that relationship to want to ask a question or feel comfortable to do so.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I was just thinking, I was looking around the other day, and Jana, I saw this past year, just this fiscal year, I think it was Nolan, had like 140 incoming and outgoing texts with one student. And they were all like really positive and helpful conversations and just back and forth. It was really great to see. But it's an ongoing conversation, and it's a real relationship that gets built. And then Luciana, your point earlier about, people just feeling like they're getting check-ins all the time. That can get especially scary this time of year when other areas of campus maybe have access to our texting system and are sending texts also. And so if you're not just coordinating your own initiatives, it needs to be a systems approach, right? We need to be coordinating our outreach efforts across all our areas. One thing that we've been able to do at Eastern is about bi-weekly have meetings with key areas across campus who affect the onboarding process. So whether it's advising, housing, I know I'm leaving people out. Orientation, obviously. Thank you, Jana. Whoever it is, us coming together and really talking and highlighting, hey, what's the next 2 weeks of communication? What does that need to look like? Who's going to receive? What's the primary message? What steps do we want students to take? And that's been a big help.
And we're kind of like overlapping, be consistent and say something, because they don't live in silos, right? Like they are very, they just like we try to be cross-departmental, cross-collaborative, these key points, there's crossover in them. And so you talk about that, and like one thing is oftentimes on campus, there are so many different systems used that don't communicate with each other. And so there's no history to know like what was said to that student as they came in, and now they're past their first semester and they're referencing those conversations, and you're like, I have no idea, because I can't access that. And that's one great thing about the platform, is that you can see what other departments, what other conversations might have been had. And for you guys, it sounds like you do those meetings. And did you start those realizing like we might be bombarding students and we need to make sure that we're on the same page with how often they're getting messages and what those messages are?
Yeah, absolutely. It was definitely, a need that we saw of needing to be more consistent and being more streamlined in our engagement approach. And so that really started the conversation. And it was also an onboarding opportunity to get our campus partners into our system, our texting system and CRM and all that great stuff. And the big thing really too, I just lost my train of thought completely. But it's been really helpful for us to coordinate, like I said earlier, our strategies going forward, who's going to respond to what, and kind of align timelines and as far as what we need to be doing to help students on board. The biggest thing for me in those meetings and in all of our texts, really, like Jana mentioned, we want to be fun, we want to be humorous, we want to be engaging, we want to be relationship building, but we also have to be clear in what we're asking students to do. So providing clarity and making it easy as possible and easy to understand is the number one thing. And when you're getting lots of messages from across campus, there's no chance of that being a clear message. Well, maybe, but it needs to be some planning and strategy in place to make sure it's consistent.
And we had to go, because all the different offices that help onboard students are in different divisions or areas. So we also had to come together collaboratively to talk about those strategies and a timeline. Within admissions, we have our own internal communication calendar that works sometimes, doesn't work all the time. So it's always getting some reviews. But when we essentially onboard staff or even faculty who want to text students, they do go through kind of a short training with us to like learn about the platform, learn like language, tone, voice. If you mess up, this is what you should do. If a student says something, this is how you opt out. So just those little things that we've had to learn over the time of using Cadence. And so it was also a learning experience for us because you see everything, right? We can pull up a student record and see the text that went out. Like, oh yeah, we should have probably warned them about this or talked about this or better planned like when that text went out from our office compared to another office on campus. And so it's been a learning experience to say the least. It's never perfect.
But you don't always have to be perfect, right? You just have to do, you're striving towards that and you're always learning. Like I'm sure each season as it goes on, you're like, that worked really well, that didn't. This is what we're going to continue with. But I think that's true in your communication to students. Like they get really used to a lot of automated things that aren't coming from humans necessarily. And it's okay to be human, be real. Like they're looking for that authenticity and that chance to build a relationship. So, I've heard folks from your office say, and other folks say, like, sometimes they don't correct a mistake in a text if there's a word spelled wrong, just so somebody knows that it came from a human. Tell a little bit about that piece.
Well, students on the receiving end, they like to test us to make sure that we're robots or not robots. So they'll say something back that's absurd, and then we respond right away. They're like, oh, I thought you were a robot. And so it's like, okay, how do we stop sounding like a robot? So misspellings, shorthand, whatever the current lingo is, which I'm still learning what that really means. Emojis or not emojis, our student staff usually tell us what's cool, what's not cool. Or sending two texts back to back. So you split up a message. And then we give, a lot of autonomy to our recruiting staff who text students and say, okay, this is the main message that, we'd want you to come out with, feel free to edit as need or finesse. And so there was one of the recruiters took that to like an extreme, and like the text responses, like the percentage was super high. And our boss, our AVP comes in, he's like, what's going on? What's this text that, so-and-so is sending? So I look it up and I'm like, oh my gosh. I mean, take it to an extreme. And the text message was saying, our file room burnt up and we need you to send us your transcripts. And I was like, you did not send that. And so, but it was the highest response text message probably that whole month. And so I never advised that. And from then on, we had to check some text messages for that person just to see how far they were really trying to go and to prevent some of that shock. But I mean, the response was quick. I mean, over 50%. And so I was like, oh my gosh.
And I remember the responses were overwhelmingly positive. Like there wasn't one negative one, really. It was like pretty entertaining to read through and follow along.
They're like, oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. Yeah, I'll talk to my counselor and get a transcript in. Like this felt like empathy for us.
Did anybody say like, do you need help? Like, should I call for help?
But obviously that's not something we'd advise doing going forward, and we've adjusted slightly. I think that's one of the best things about the tools we were talking about earlier is the monitoring capabilities. We've had people go rogue. We've had campus, when we onboard a campus partner into the product, we go through a training with them like Jana mentioned, but if they do something that doesn't align with what our expectations are, we deactivate their account immediately until they go through further training. And we've had to do that a few times with a few of our campus partners, but it's all worked out towards the end. But it all goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning of like, we don't want people to feel like it's spam messaging. Because if they get a message from one area that's spammy and doesn't resonate or doesn't add value, then why would they look at any of our further text going forward?
Sure.
So it is, we have to really, that consistency is really key in like, hey, no, we are about this relationship and about wanting to, you know, create value for you. We don't want to be a spam account.
Do you guys have any? Go ahead.
Hey everybody, this is Laura. I am off camera over here in the chat and the Q&A watching so that I can make sure I share the questions with our facilitators. And we have so many good questions coming in. I kind of didn't want to wait to bring them up. So is it okay with y'all if I share a couple of the things that are coming into the chat?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so we had a question about any insights as to when opt-outs happen and any aha moments related to higher than usual opt-outs. Anything you'd want to share about that, Nate and Jana?
We saw a big opt-out happen after that Campus Partners sent a mass text that was not great. So I think anything that goes against the goal of relationship building and personalization, you're going to see higher opt-outs. Even this morning, I was talking with our orientation team about sending a text message. They want to send a text message. Students have the option for our orientations to pay for overnight visit, for example. So they wanted to follow up with students who signed up for the overnight but haven't paid yet. But that can't be your first text. Of being like, hey, you know, we noticed you haven't paid yet. Here's like, you know, even if it's the most friendly, personable, like customer servicey text in the world of like, hey, we want to help you get this done. That can't be your first text to students.
They're only going to send me texts when I owe money.
Exactly. Like,
Right?
that's the EW. Like, you know, there's already so much out there culturally about the value of higher education, and it's, you know, not worth your money. So if our first text to a student is, you know, hey, let's make sure you get this paid, that's not what we want to do, and that's not what we're about, right? So the first text needs to be like, what are you most excited about for your overnight visit? Or what are you most excited about for orientation? Or some open-ended relationship building component, and then follow up later with some of the more transactional stuff as needed.
And I would add in too, there is a difference in response rate when like we have an admissions box. And so if it goes out, a general text goes out to all students from the admissions text, the return rate is not really high. But if it's an individual recruiter who is texting their students within their territories, counties, high schools, whatever, however folks break it up, then there's a higher response rate. Because again, they know that person, they've been introduced before. But we do see those opt-outs when we do those mass text messages that don't necessarily aren't warm and fuzzy, they're more transactional. Or like in the beginning of the season, and then also moving towards some more mass texting around the springtime, really figuring out where students are at in the process. Those also, you'll see some opt-outs or low responses. And so it's just, sometimes you have to do that just because we are trying to communicate with such a large amount of students. But we always have a plan of like, what's the text next week? What's the follow-up? Just in case they don't respond to that person.
And the nice part about that too is that if they opt out of one of those, they're not opting out of all communication, because each person has their own number, right? Or each team has their own box. So, you know, that helps to insulate that a little bit more.
It does. Yeah. And so that's a really good point too, of like making sure your teams are set up, right? Yeah. Because you want to make sure that if someone opts out of a housing text because they don't plan on living on campus, that they're not opting out of all your future admissions related texts. Right. So making sure those are set up well at the beginning is really important for that too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great, thank you. All right, I'm going back into the Q&A world, but please do keep these questions coming. I also shared a best practice, and I think Nate and Jana, you're probably going to hit on some of this later, but one of our attendees shared that they use emojis in their texts and more informal speaking conventions to avoid being thought of as bots. So I know based on my sneak peek of what we're going to cover throughout the session that that's come up with you all as well. So please keep them coming. I will voice our questions and I will go ahead and head back over to Q&A.
Thanks, Laura.
And I know we'll talk about that in the Connect, but I wanted to hit on one more thing on like being consistent and kind of say something that, both, in that you give your staff a lot of freedom and flexibility to send those, right? which hit on the being human, building the relationship part. In having some of that oversight, you're able to make sure that if you need to pull it back, that you are. Is there much sharing like among staff on like able to say like, hey guys, so and so sent out this text and it worked really well? Like, you know, maybe think of making it your own, or you instead of working harder, work smarter, and not reinvent the wheel.
Yeah. Nate, I can talk about the staff side if you want to talk about.
Yeah, you want me to start first, or you want to
go? You can go.
All right. So there's kind of two primary texting groups for our recruitment purposes. There's the admissions staff, the advisors who do the majority of the relationship building. But we also started last year a student communication center. So we have current EW students who are doing texting and calling, and now they're doing some content creation work as well. And so we have, and that team works very closely together, exactly how you described. So they're constantly bouncing ideas off each other, trying to get their response rates to improve, seeing what works best. It's pretty, there's about 5 of them that are texting at a time usually, and they all work collaboratively to see what's working, what's not working, and go from there. And it is, for the student staff, we typically script the first message. They get to like play around with it a little bit, but the relationship building really takes place in the back and forth. And that's where they have a lot more freedom. And then we do monitor and do some like quality assurance to make sure messages are going across as clear as possible for what needs to happen. So,
because there's a balance of being from that person to be human and from that person, but also the institution's voice that has their own, you know, lingo and voice as well. And so just like we talk about balancing automation and human touch, there's balancing an individual person with the voice of the institution.
Yeah, exactly. And you get a lot more leeway if you can identify yourself as a current student, we found, right?
Okay.
That really opens doors for communication and engagement to have the current student talk about just life as a student. And we tend to really like, hey, no, this is it needs to be authentic and genuine. You need to really describe what you're feeling and how you think about EWU. And we do some training, of course, around like what the EW brand is and what our purpose is and our vision and values. And then really it's just helping them and kind of creating like bumpers on a bowling alley to make sure they're headed the right direction. But we do want to make sure they have creative freedom to express themselves and build real honest connections.
And they get excited on the student piece, and staff do as well, but the current students get excited when they find out the student is from their hometown, or if they're from out of state, or it's like another level of like, okay, let's go. Like, I'm ready to like text back and forth with you, where they ask about a club that they're a part of. And so that's something that from a staff perspective, we can't necessarily provide or have that tone or voice. But our current students also are understanding the value of communication. So there is, you know, a professional development level for current students to see how this mode works and how communicating with others is. And they're also good about, you know, because they're in a space together, some cubicles, and they're good about, you know, yelling for like one of our staff members or Gavin, who oversees the centers. Hey, they asked this, what am I supposed to say? Like, this is what I want to say, but how do I say it? And so working with them on how to say things or portray a response. So it's a lot. It's also, I mean, it's a lot of fun.
Well, and that is it's the way that they prefer to communicate with others. If it was a call center and somebody were to call in, they'd be like, no, I don't want to talk to a human, but I'll interact with you via text or, you know, chat all day long, as long as I don't have to actually talk to a human, right? So like, it's really comfortable for them to have those interactions.
Oh, and the center does make calls too. And even our student staff, they cringe every time we're about to start a calling campaign. Like, that's the last thing they want to do. It usually takes a couple of rounds of practice before we dive in on those, but we still do a few calls. But, you know, we're just trying to connect with people lots of different ways. Not everyone wants to be connected the same way. But overall, typically, text response is higher than phone call connections.
It's funny when they get a parent, though. Sometimes the cell number or the phone number on an application is the parent number. And so they'll be texting and then, oh, this is the parent of so-and-so. And they're like, oh, and so they feel like they have to be more serious. And so we're like, oh, okay, let's talk through this. But Yeah, but on the staff side, especially if we have new staff members joining the team, they go through kind of that initial, you know, what to do, what not to do, ideas on and examples of how to build a relationship via texting. But also each month kind of give them a preview, like this is what season we're in, this is kind of the topic that we're going to talk about. We have like a shared document that folks can access, and you know, this is the main message. You're more than welcome to go out and finesse it and make it your own. And they do share, we have a Teams chat and they share with each other what worked, what didn't work. We look at numbers from the dashboard weekly and try to identify, you know, what messaging or who got a high response rate to see what message did you send and what worked. And so they do share with each other quite often how students reacted to their text message, and you know, say, hey, maybe you want to try it, or say this or do this, and this is what I got.
They also share their wins and their losses. Like,
Oh, yeah.
hey, this is a great conversation, or wow, this one was not so good. But it's even the not so great ones, it's fun because the staff can rally around the person, and they usually come up with pretty humorous ideas of trying to continue the conversation, or just, you know, yep, we'll take this L and walk out.
Well, that's how you learn, right? Like, you know, having some of those that like, I'm not stepping in that or doing that again. I think as we're heading into melt season for admissions and enrollment, like that peer-to-peer can be super powerful because it's only natural to look for those communications, and especially with peers. Gen Z is so savvy, you know, like they're used to being marketed to in multiple ways, and they don't like it. They want to hear like from their peers, what's really happening, how is this going, like tell me the truth. And there's just so much more weight when it's carried by peers. So do you guys find like it's especially useful as we're heading into melt season for that peer-to-peer interaction that you guys on texting?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's personalization and segmentation is key, right?
Yeah.
So there's always populations that are going to have higher needs that the students just can't really help with. So we don't want to put the students in a situation where they become the middle person and have to then just navigate the conversation, and they can't really help the person right then and there. So for some things, you know, we want to make sure the recruiters are reaching out because they're the ones who can help, or we want to plug in financial aid team right away to make sure they can connect. But generally, yeah, I think, you know, having those student conversations are so valuable, and we want to create as many opportunities for those to take place. And so not just via text, but in like our monthly newsletter, we have a section in there where they can request to follow up with a current student, or just opportunities for them to sign up to connect or have a meeting, or just lots of as many places as possible. We're trying to post that phone number to text if they want to text with a current student.
And I think that's important too. And we share that number, but also share like what time they're going to be available too. So not necessarily, you know, 24/7. There's a set time that our student team is available to respond to text messages and help answer any questions. And I think that helps also kind of build that time frame and hopefully excitement to connect with somebody. But we love our faculty, but we also share with them, if you have current students in your majors that would want to text or communicate with students, let us know. Because again, not only just our student comm team, but our current students who are in different majors, they can truly speak to that. And so that segmentation and personalization is used there to say if the student's interest in biology or environmental science or whatever the case may be, that current student can really speak to how classes are, office times, you know, what to expect in a classroom that we can't answer as professionals because we're not in that major or know that information.
All right, we've got lots of interest in this topic, so I'm going to jump in again with a couple of questions for you. We hit on something, y'all. Let's dig into it. So one of the questions is, one of our attendees is considering adding a chat bot to their communication strategy, and they were wondering, we're talking a lot about text, we just talked about emails, newsletters, different ways, and the 24/7 being available, being able to answer questions and engage with students. So they were just wondering if you have anything that you'd like to share about how a chat bot has come into play with your communication strategy or helped your staff in general.
I think we do have a chat bot, and it's helped I think primarily in the volume at the front desk. When we're open 8 to 5, and even after 5 o'clock, there's some responses that our Swoop bot can respond to. And I think that's just been a huge help for volume at the front desk. We're able to obtain information from students who do ask a question on there. We also found out current students visit and use that bot. Some faculty like to test it. We've learned that too. That was kind of funny. Like try to trick it. And I'm like, you guys. And so it's been helpful in that sense, but it also can lead students who have questions to a person. So, you get to a point where we need to connect with a human on the team, and that allows us to contact that student or that parent or that high school counselor who, communicates that way. And so we do promote the chat function on all our print and pieces, and we've had it for a few years now, and it's something it's valuable to us. I don't think something that should or will go away, because we're, as Nate's topic of AI and helping in that form, it is needed as we continue to grow in the digital and tech world.
Yeah, and we partner with Mongoose on our chatbot and texting, and so it's really great to have the integration of those two and being able to work together and do follow-ups like we know when students have. We can grab leads from people who have started a chat conversation if they provide their phone number or text number or email. And so that's really valuable too. But I think you're right, Jana. The biggest thing was cutting down probably calls to the front desk, or just helping people navigate the website, get where they need to go faster.
And like lead gen, we could talk about that a lot, because a lot of people wouldn't think about that, and we're in a time where names aren't as available, and we're trying to get every student connection we can have. But as a parent of college age kids, inevitably my kids will reach out to me at 9 or 10 at night and be like, Mom, how do I find blah, blah, blah? And I'm like, did you go to the website? Did you go and try to find it? And they have what I call the 3-click rule. If they have to click more than 3 times, they're out. And there's a lot of things we have to have on EDU sites that aren't necessarily user-friendly to get to the information somebody might be looking for. And to be able to go on there and find that when a human isn't available, or at least lead them to close to the right direction and maybe need a follow-up, it is a huge piece. So I think that side's important. I also think, like, people live in different time zones. If you're recruiting outside your area, or you have students like, internationally or in other time zones, like there might not be people available the time that they can talk. And so having that as well. So I just threw out a couple of things. Have you guys found that, any of those pieces that I've said to be true, or stories, or any ideas about this? We're totally going.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, the website thing, every university has a different website, right? It's not all consistent. So you have a user who's going to go to each website, and that's going to be a
different naming conventions.
Absolutely. Different acronyms. Hello, higher education, right? So the chatbot can help a lot with that. And then you mentioned time zones. That's something that you really need to consider as we talk about personalization and segmentation, like not inviting the students out of Hawaii to your open house this weekend. Like that's not going to work probably. Or and then also just being aware of time zones. So we want to make sure, like, if we're having if we're having the tech center open from 3 to 7, then we're going to stagger what populations receive the text when based off what works, based off their time zones. So those are all things that we consider and should be considered.
Yeah, because also if you're texting with transfer students or adult learners, their time frame is a lot different than high school students who are in the classroom and may not have their phone next to them. And we don't want to get anybody in trouble by texting them at noon or in the middle of class. So I think we've been mindful of that, as well as depending who we're talking to and what the message is, and communicating up to a certain time with them as well. But I was thinking back to the chatbot, even now myself, like I rather just type in a question in a bot and get a response than have to call. And so I'm like, why wouldn't our students, parents, others want to do the same thing? Because it's efficient and effective in getting a response. And so how do we, even though it may be hard for us in admission offices or higher education, but what can we do to make things easier for students? for them to get that information or to get that support, so that they can get to that next stepping stone that they need to go onto to get to our institution or other institutions.
Right.
You just reminded me of something. It's always entertaining to me because we always want to make sure we don't text people while they're in classes, as best we can, right? But the amount of responses we get from students who are currently at work is really entertaining. So like, oh, I'm at work, and we're like, oh, okay, so sorry, can we follow up and chat later? Like, no, it's fine, I'm just working. It's like, okay, here we go. That's always entertaining.
That multitasking, right? Like they're
Totally.
used to having multiple screens. Like we as a society have gotten used to doing that and looking and seeing at multiple things at one time to be more efficient in time, even though we have more efficiencies than ever. We're still looking for ways to cut that down.
And we're pretty good. We learned along the way how to be humorous about, and it's kind of connected to what we previously talked about. But Nate and I had a training, and if you want to.
You can tell it.
No, you go ahead.
This is like the famous point where we realized, well, for us, it was really entertaining. When we first started implementing texting and started incorporating it, one of the people leading our training went through it and set up created the segment, started the text, and did a bunch of gibberish on the, just showing an example to the group, press send, and then lo and behold, the responses start trickling in.
And mind you, this is on like a PowerPoint. We were doing training
we're like
recruiters
in front of like 50 people, like showing, what we're doing.
And we're like,
what we're excited about.
Why are there responses on the screen? Didn't you use like test accounts? So if you're using test accounts, make sure they're test accounts.
Yeah, so lesson learned. But we always do those oops things, and we luckily have a team around our mascot Swoop who are wonderful to work with, and so we kind of just blamed that one on Swoop, our mascot, and said, sorry, Swoop got a hold of the texting account, and those feathers don't work so well when typing. And so,
oh my goodness.
And it turned into like a little social media thing. So,
oh yeah, students loved it.
It goes back to what we were talking about earlier, as far as like, it's not a robotic message. Like we're people, and it's fun and engaging, and that's what it's supposed to be. And I think that's something we are really intentional about with our texting is, most of our texts, very few of our texts are automated when we're using the system at EWU. I know there's a lot of value in automating texts for different things, but the majority of our texts are all person to person.
Yeah, it's that balance that, to me.
Yeah.
Laura, was there another question?
Hey, they're coming in here, y'all. So we have a request for some samples, some documentation so people can get a little peek into how you plan your text messaging so they can know how to better plan their text messaging. So I'll follow up on that. I just wanted to make sure I put that out there. We've had Kate shared that they have had a great response by allowing prospective students to text with questions. So thinking about it from student initiated texting as well. So would love to hear about that. The theme I'm seeing is this empathetic communication. You hit on it, Jana, when you were saying that you want to make it easier for the students. So you don't want to, well, maybe you'll text them while they're at work since they're okay with that. It sounds like, Nate. You don't want to text them when they're in class, but we've got some questions about advice on using language that appeals to traditional freshmen, traditional transfer, non-traditional students, graduate students. So maybe if y'all could just share a little bit more insight into how do you personalize? How do you make sure that you understand your audience and make sure that the language that you're using and the approach that you're using in your communication is going to land with them?
I can start us off, Nate. I think the nice part about Mongoose is that we're able to see information about the student on the platform. So, and then obviously in our CRM as well. And so there's a lot of information about a student. And so it's just being mindful about what message do you want to send out? Is it about their campus interest? Is it about their major? Is it about location, cost? And so that can help start the conversation and thinking about what language to use. Transfer students, they probably want to know what credits are going to transfer over. What do they have to do? Or do they have to go to orientation? And grad studies hasn't necessarily dipped into texting just yet, so that could be a future opportunity for us. But working with adult learners, they want to know more about like what time is going to class be, like what options do we have. And so it's building up that training to have examples of that and talking with staff through it, even our student staff. But also with like our traditional freshmen, we lean on our current students to tell us what's cool and not cool. And that has been a big help for us because they'll tell us, you know, we'll run it by them and they're like, oh, don't use that emoji. Or
Nobody says that anymore.
Yeah, yeah. Or like we'll say, because, you know, students, if they haven't responded in a while, they'll be like, you know, are you ghosting us? And our current students are like, let's not use that word anymore, you know? And so like really leaning on our current students for advice, especially with traditional freshmen, because they're around the same age, kind of, especially if they're from the same area or state or type of student. And so it's been super helpful for us to be mindful of how we say things and how we misspell things as well. They have a lot of insight, and some of it we can't, like, we're not going to do that. You know, we're like, okay, that's from coming from a student. Okay, perfect. But coming from a recruiter, probably not too cool. But there's been a few text messages of like, hey, what's up, so-and-so, and like super casual. And there's been emojis that our current students have said we're okay using those type of thing. But the language is important. It helps build that connection again. And sometimes it feels unnatural to us older folks.
It's amazing how quickly like language changes, right? Like something you hear and you think is cool, like how quickly they no longer use that.
Yeah. I think for me, I agree with everything that was said, and really the population changes should change kind of the topic and interest areas, like Jana was saying. But if you get too into trying to use the correct language, you're not going to come across very authentic. Your staff. So really you need to stay true to kind of who you are in your text messaging, because you want to come across genuine to build a connection. And you can build connections across generations. It can happen. Like we've seen it happen. It works. So don't be too nervous about like using the right lingo. It's more about just getting it started, starting the conversation, starting building those relationships, and just be genuine, because they'll know. Like everyone can tell pretty clearly when you're trying to like
sound like, cool, hey, when you're really not.
Exactly.
Yeah, like you have this super informal text and then you send them an email and it's very formal. It's like this doesn't match. But
I can't tell you how many
oh no, go ahead.
I was gonna say, I can't tell you how many scripts we've made and then it went to the students and are like, yeah, we're not gonna say this.
Yeah.
Or we're not, this is not gonna work for us. We're gonna have, I was like, all right, let's get back to it. Let's redraft and go from there. So
I use a lot of exclamation points like in my communication, and then like sometimes somebody will look at that and be like, that's too many. And then they meet me and they're like, no, you talk with exclamation points. So like, when you talk about that being human or authentic to who you are, you also like have this whole campus full of individuals to ask, like what attracted you to EW? What things did you like, and not make it again so marketing lingo, really authentic. So like I worked with an institution, and everyone for a while was like, we're in the rolling hills of so and so, and the students are like rolled around, they don't care about that. But I had an institution who used the message "wanna shred." They were in a ski town, and the response that they got back, because their current student said like that was a big reason why they chose that for the location. And so using your resources, like when you're in an area that has these different like resources, ask your students why did you choose here, and then use their words and their language to help talk to the students like them who you're looking to recruit.
Exactly. It never hurts to host some focus groups or survey the incoming freshman class or seniors who are leaving, like pulling advice from current students. Like they're the ones who have the experience, they have the wealth of knowledge, so why not tap into that and see them as partners to continue bringing in your future students. And there's not a magic phrase or formula or question to ask. Like a lot of it is like trial and error, and then finding kind of that flow that works for the institution or for that office. And so you learn really quickly. I mean, what works and what doesn't work. There's no time wasted.
And I think one of the big traps that, we try to be conscious of, but typically, can fall into pretty easily is doing that every year, right? Like we need to audit our text every single time. Like every cycle is a different population. Every group we're working with might have different interests. So needing to, just constantly be evolving and changing and working with the students where they're at.
Yeah. And all that information is available to us, right? On the dashboard, we can pull reports, we can look at the language, we can go through all that. So it's there for us as professionals to go through and to audit and to see what works and doesn't work. And it doesn't hurt to do that over, a coffee or in a group, because it can be very entertaining as well. And then ways to recognize messaging that was really positive and recognize messaging that, how can we change this a little bit to help serve students?
All right, so I know we have about 9 minutes left, and the comments and the questions keep coming in. If we didn't get a chance to answer those live, I'll make sure that we do answer them as a follow-up. But I wanted to just ask one last one right now before I hand it back over to you all, because we were talking about, Nate said we need to make sure that you do that every year, to keep updating, to keep making sure that you're refreshing and strategizing based on your audience for each year. And so a question that came in was, what method do you use to request and allow students to update their contact information, such as cell numbers? So can you tell a little bit more about how you make sure that you have the right contact information for the students and for the parents and for your different audiences?
Yeah, I think for us, we want students to opt in. Like we want students to opt into texting. So we want that opt in and provide mobile phone number everywhere we can put it. So on our inquiry forms, on our tour signups, on our event signups, on our
chat.
application. What's that?
In your chat.
Yeah, in the chat, exactly. Yep. So we want students to opt in, and that really has helped us. Like we haven't had too many issues of wrong texts or wrong phone numbers because of that. They provide the phone number, they opt into the texting, and that goes a long way for us.
And I would add into, if you're working with campus partners, summer camps, other programs who have some sort of registration form, is to work with them to ask them to add in that like checkbox opt-in for text messages or opt-in for communication from Eastern. And that way we can collect that information too from different departments across campus as well.
Great, thank you. All right, I'll hand it back to you. Please do keep coming in with the questions and the comments, though. I'll still be over here, but we'll go ahead and hand it back over so you all can wrap us up.
Yeah, so I am going to go back and just want to do a quick recap on the three, like I said, the three overarching themes that we saw: ways to create community with digital communication. So saying something, having a call to action, asking yourself before you send the message some important conversations about, why am I sending this? Like, does it make sense? Is there a clear purpose? We talked a lot to Nate and to Jana about doing that with their staff, just to make sure they're aware before they hit send that they're doing all those things. Being consistent. So having a plan, it doesn't have to be perfect. It's always going to be refined, but being cross-collaborative, being mindful of all the different communications that a student's going to be receiving across the life cycle from different parts of campus, to make sure that there isn't too many overlapping messages, that it seems like it's cohesive as possible, to not have them say like, I'm done, or I'm not wanting to get anything else. And then the connecting, and human nature is we want to find connection with other humans. So asking the resources, current students we have on campus, thinking of stories that make us human to connect with students. If you were a first generation student, relaying that to somebody else who's going through it, to have that shared experience. So I know there's always this balance of the cool lingo versus and being casual versus being too professional. And so trying to find that balance. Those are the things that come to mind for me. do you guys have anything additional you want to add or say about these 3 topics?
The only thing I want to add really at this point, I saw in the chat, we mentioned storytelling and you mentioned it too there at the end, but I think that's a great opportunity to share student stories and start, give your audience the opportunity to see themselves and experience the things that our current students are experiencing. And we've actually this year done some student spotlights on our communications team. So we do a storytelling about, some awesome experience they got to do, like creative writing at Yellowstone trip, like that program, which is awesome. And they write about wolves and do all kinds of cool stuff. But then also followed up like, hey, do you have questions about this program? Here's a number to chat the actual student and ask them for yourself what the experience was like, or other students like them. So those storytelling opportunities are huge also.
And I would just add on that, just remembering to be yourselves, connect throughout the whole year, not just this month or next month, because it's time for them to apply or time for them to make a decision, but just throughout the whole year and as they move on to orientation or advising or other programs as well. And being that person for them that they know they can ask questions to, even if whenever they become a current student as well, because it's really powerful for students and for retention to have a person that they can go to when they're on a college campus. And so this is just one way of building that community on our campus.
And Jana, if you are doing that, if you're not just, if it's a clear purpose and call to action, but it's relational building and not just then when you need something, that creates that I have a person that I can go to if something comes up and need be. And maybe it's not the correct person for that issue, but to have somebody who can guide and mentor and direct you to the right one is so powerful. Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us. I did want to mention that if you feel like this was helpful to learn from leaders like Nate and Jana, we do have our FYI series that's every other Tuesday. Be sure to sign up and you'll get more of this and insights from great leaders out there in our higher education world. So thank you everyone so much for joining us. Thank you so much, Jana, award-winning Jana and Nate, and best of luck to both of you on these next few steps of your education.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Everyone have a good day.
You too.